Imagine standing at the altar ready to say, "I do," when a truth so devastating shatters your entire world. What if every red flag was screaming, but you were too blind to see them? Join us as we dissect Richard's story, revealing the subtle yet insidious prenuptial missteps that led to a wedding day revelation that changed everything. Richard Harrison sits alone in his home office at 3 in the morning, the glow of multiple computer screens casting blue shadows across his face. His fingers move across the keyboard with practiced precision, debugging code for the latest software update his company will release next quarter. He is 35 years old, lean and perpetually tired-looking, with the kind of intelligence that built a tech empire but left him utterly unprepared for the complexities of human deception. His days blur together in an endless stream of board meetings, product launches, investor calls, and late nights writing code because it is the only thing that makes sense to him anymore. In 6 hours, he will marry Vanessa Kline in a ceremony at the historic Schiller Park Chapel in Columbus, Ohio, specifically in the quiet suburb of Minerva Park, where he bought a sprawling modern home 2 years ago. The house is filled with expensive furniture he never chose, art he does not understand, and wedding gifts already stacked in the unused dining room. He should be sleeping, should be excited, should be anything except this hollow numbness that settles in his chest whenever he stops working long enough to think. Richard built his company, Harrison Analytics, from his college apartment 9 years ago with nothing but a laptop, student loan debt, and an algorithm that predicted consumer behavior with unsettling accuracy. Within 5 years, he had 200 employees, contracts with Fortune 500 companies, and a net worth that made him uncomfortable to discuss. But success in business meant failure in everything else. He missed his father's funeral because of a product launch, lost touch with college friends who couldn't relate to his world, and spent his 34th birthday alone in a hotel room in San Francisco eating takeout Chinese food while reviewing quarterly projections. His mother called him every Sunday and asked the same question. "When are you going to find someone, Richard?" The loneliness was a physical thing, a weight that pressed on him during rare quiet moments, and he told himself that once the company stabilized, once the IPO went through, once he had time, he would figure out how to be a normal person who had relationships and knew how to talk about things other than code and market analysis. Then he met Vanessa at a charity gala in Cincinnati 6 months ago, and she smiled at him like he was the only person in the room, and something in him that had been frozen for years suddenly thawed. She was beautiful in a way that made him forget how to form sentences, dark hair that caught the light, green eyes that seemed to see through all his defenses, a laugh that made him feel clever and interesting. She asked him about his work, actually listened to his explanations about machine learning and data mining, and when she touched his arm and said, "You're not like other men I've met," he believed her completely. Before we continue with this story, please subscribe to this channel. It means everything to us. Like this video so more people can hear this tale and tell us where you are watching from in the comment section. Now, let us continue. The courtship happened with a speed that should have alarmed him. Within 2 weeks of meeting, Vanessa was spending every weekend at his house in Minerva Park, redecorating rooms and talking about their future with a certainty that felt like fate. She came from money. Her father was Judge Marcus Kline of Cincinnati, her mother from old Ohio wealth that traced back to railroad fortunes, but she claimed to find Richard's self-made success refreshing and authentic. She asked detailed questions about his company's structure, his assets, his investments, and he interpreted this as genuine interest rather than reconnaissance. When his college roommate David met Vanessa over dinner and later pulled Richard aside to say, "Man, I don't know, something feels off about her," Richard had bristled with defensive anger. "You're just jealous," he had said, "because I finally found someone." David never brought it up again, and Richard stopped inviting him over. Vanessa had a way of doing that, subtly turning him away from people who questioned their relationship while making it feel like his own choice. She would say things like, "Your friends don't really understand you the way I do," or "Why do we need to spend time with people who make you doubt us?" And Richard, so desperate to believe in this love, agreed. His secretary, Margaret, a woman who had worked for him since the company's second year, had hesitated when Richard announced the engagement. "Mr. Harrison," she had said carefully, "you've only known her 3 months. Are you sure you want to rush into this?" He had smiled condescendingly and told her that when you know, a phrase Vanessa used constantly. The red flags were there from the beginning, bright and waving, but Richard's loneliness and his engineer's brain conspired to explain them all away. There was the matter of Vanessa's finances. She claimed to have a trust fund, but was always vague about the details, deflecting questions with kisses and subject changes. When Richard suggested she might want a prenuptial agreement, "Just standard protection, something my lawyer recommends for everyone," Vanessa had cried for 3 hours, accused him of not trusting her, said that if he really loved her, he would know she wasn't after his money. He had apologized, held her while she sobbed, and never mentioned the prenup again. His banker, Thomas Chen, had called him personally after Vanessa convinced Richard to add her name to one of his investment accounts for emergency access. "Richard," Thomas had said, his voice tight with professional concern, "I've known you for 7 years. This is unusual. You're giving someone you've known for 4 months access to accounts worth millions." Richard had felt a flash of doubt, a cold finger trailing down his spine, but then Vanessa had walked into his office wearing the smile that made him forget everything else, and he had told Thomas to complete the transfer. There was her brother, Marcus, named after their father, who was always around, always too familiar, standing too close to Vanessa, touching her lower back in ways that made Richard uncomfortable, but that he told himself were just different family dynamics. Marcus had moved to Columbus to be closer to family 2 months ago and was staying in their guest house. And when Richard suggested maybe Marcus should find his own place, Vanessa had turned cold for 3 days until Richard apologized and said, of course, Marcus could stay as long as he needed. The wedding planning became a masterclass in manipulation that Richard's logical mind somehow failed to decode. Vanessa insisted on a quick wedding, 6 months from engagement to altar, claiming that life is short and we shouldn't waste time. She took over his calendar, scheduled meetings with wedding planners during his work hours, made decisions about flowers and music and seating arrangements without consulting him, and when he protested that he had important product launches to manage, she would tear up and say, "I guess our wedding isn't important to you." He would immediately backtrack, cancel meetings, let her make all the decisions because it was easier than fighting, and because some part of him believed he deserved to be punished for prioritizing work over love. She convinced him to change his will for tax efficiency. Her father, the judge, had recommended an attorney who specialized in complex estate planning, and Richard had signed documents he barely read because Vanessa said, "Don't you trust my father? He's a judge, Richard. He knows what he's doing." His own attorney, the one who had handled his business contracts for years, had sent him a concerned email. "Richard, I reviewed the documents you forwarded. These aren't standard estate planning forms. They essentially give your fiancé control over your liquid assets immediately upon marriage, and the trust structures are highly unusual. Can we schedule a call?" Richard had meant to call back, had put it on his to-do list, but Vanessa had kissed his neck and asked him to take her to dinner, and the call never happened. His friends, the few who remained, tried in their own ways to warn him. His former business partner, Jennifer, who had left the company to start her own venture, had taken him to coffee 3 weeks before the wedding and spoken with the bluntness of someone who had nothing to lose. "Richard, I'm going to say this once because I care about you. Vanessa is isolating you. You've cut off everyone who questions this relationship. You're signing documents you don't read. You look exhausted and anxious all the time. This isn't what love looks like." Richard had stood up from the table, left $40 for a $12 coffee, and walked out without another word. He had not spoken to Jennifer since. David had tried one more time, sending a long email 2 weeks before the wedding outlining his concerns. The rushed timeline, Vanessa's financial secrecy, the way she controlled Richard's social life, Marcus's constant presence, the changes in Richard's personality. Richard had deleted the email without finishing it and blocked David's number. He told himself they were jealous, that they did not understand, that love required sacrifice and compromise. The truth was darker and simpler. Richard had invested so much, emotionally, financially, socially, in this relationship that admitting it was built on lies would mean admitting he had been a fool, and his pride could not survive that revelation. The gaslighting was so subtle, so expertly executed, that Richard never recognized it as manipulation. When he would express doubt about some decision Vanessa had made, redecorating his office, firing his cleaning service and hiring a new one, planning an expensive honeymoon he could not afford time for, she would twist his words until he questioned his own perception. "You said you wanted me to feel at home here," she would say, tears gathering in her eyes. "I thought you wanted me to be part of your life. If you don't want me involved, just say so." And Richard, who had spent his life solving logical problems with clear solutions, found himself unable to navigate the emotional minefield she created. He would apologize, agree that he had been unclear, promise to communicate better, and Vanessa would smile and forgive him and ask for something else: access to another account, another document signed, another friend removed from the wedding guest list because they make me uncomfortable. The sunk cost fallacy, which Richard understood intellectually from business school, controlled him completely in his personal life. He had spent 6 months building this relationship, alienated friends and ignored warnings, committed to a wedding with 300 guests and deposits that totaled more than $100,000. Backing out now would mean admitting failure, facing public humiliation, and confronting the terrifying possibility that he was as naive about people as everyone seemed to think. So he pushed forward, choosing hope over evidence, love over logic, and every step toward the altar felt simultaneously inevitable and wrong. The night before the wedding, Richard could not sleep. He sat in his office working on code that did not need fixing, his mind racing with thoughts he could not organize into coherent concerns. Vanessa was staying at a hotel downtown with her bridesmaids. "Tradition, darling, you're not supposed to see me before the ceremony." And the house felt empty and cold. He pulled up his phone and scrolled through old photos, himself and David at college graduation, laughing with their arms around each other, Jennifer and him celebrating their first major contract, his mother at her 70th birthday party looking happy and proud. All people he had pushed away in the past 6 months. He thought about the documents he had signed without reading, the access he had granted to accounts he had spent years building, the will that gave Vanessa control over assets worth $47 million. He thought about Marcus, who claimed to be a consultant, but whom Richard had never seen actually work, and the way Vanessa's eyes went cold when she thought no one was watching. Doubt crept in like smoke under a door, and for the first time in months, Richard let himself think the forbidden thought. What if everyone was right? What if I've been played? But then his phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. "Can't sleep. Missing you already. Tomorrow we start forever." And he pushed the doubts down, locked them away, told himself he was just experiencing normal pre-wedding anxiety. He took 2 sleeping pills and lay in bed staring at the ceiling until unconsciousness finally came. The wedding day arrives with cruel sunshine and unseasonably warm October weather. Richard stands in the small preparation room at Schiller Park Chapel, adjusting his tie in the mirror while his hands shake with something that feels less like excitement and more like dread. The room smells of roses and wood polish, and through the closed door he can hear the string quartet tuning instruments and guests arriving in cheerful waves of conversation. His best man, a college acquaintance he barely knows anymore, David was supposed to stand beside him, but that bridge is burned, helps him into his jacket and makes nervous jokes that Richard does not hear. The ceremony is scheduled to begin in 30 minutes. Richard's phone sits on the small table beside his jacket, and he reaches for it to check the time, to distract himself from the growing wrongness that pulses in his chest. His thumb accidentally swipes across the screen, opening his voice recorder app. He uses it constantly for recording meeting notes and ideas he has while driving, and he sees with surprise that it is running. The red recording indicator pulses steadily, and the timestamp shows it has been recording for 23 minutes. How did that start? He wonders, and he is about to stop it when curiosity makes him press play instead. The recording crackles to life, and Richard hears his own voice from 20 minutes ago making small talk with his best man. Then silence as the best man leaves to check on the groomsmen. Then, faintly, voices in the hallway. The preparation room door must not have closed completely. He turns up the volume, pressing the phone to his ear. Vanessa's voice, unmistakable. Can't believe we're actually pulling this off. 3 more hours and everything transfers automatically. A man's voice responds, and Richard recognizes it with a jolt of shock. Marcus, Vanessa's brother. You played him perfectly, V. I didn't think he'd sign the trust documents without reading them, but you had him so twisted up he would have signed over his kidney if you asked sweetly enough. Vanessa laughs, a sound Richard has heard 1,000 times, but that now carries a cruelty he never noticed. The prenup fight was genius. Cry for 3 hours, make him feel like a monster for suggesting it, and suddenly he's desperate to prove he trusts me. Men are so predictable when they're lonely. Richard's hand grips the phone so tightly it shakes. His vision narrows to a tunnel. He cannot breathe. Marcus continues. And the will restructure? That was the masterstroke. The second you say, I do, the trust activates and transfers $47 million into the offshore accounts we set up. We give it 3 weeks, enough time for a honeymoon and settling in. Then, we trigger the divorce clause using the infidelity provision we buried in page 37 of the prenup he didn't sign. Vanessa's voice is bright with satisfaction. He gets nothing. We get everything. And his pride is so destroyed he won't even fight it. By the time he figures out what happened, we'll be in the Caymans, and his assets will be distributed across 15 corporate shells his lawyers will spend years trying to untangle. Richard stops the recording. He stands perfectly still in the small room while his entire world collapses inward like a dying star. The phone slips from his hand and clatters on the table. Every warning he ignored, every red flag he explained away, every friend he alienated, all of it crashes over him in a wave of realization so devastating he has to sit down before his legs give out. He is not having a wedding. He is attending his own execution, and he sold the tickets. The room spins. His carefully constructed reality, the love story, the perfect partner, the future he had planned, reveals itself as nothing but code written by someone else, and he was too blind to see it. His breath comes in short, painful gasps. 27 minutes until the ceremony. 27 minutes until he walks down the aisle and signs away everything he built. The voice recorder saved him by accident, by the random chance of an app remaining open in his pocket, and Richard, who has spent his entire life believing in logic and cause and effect, feels the universe tilt sideways. He picks up the phone with trembling hands and plays the recording again, and then a third time, because some part of him still cannot accept that this is real. But the voices do not change. The truth does not soften. Vanessa and Marcus laugh about his blindness, his desperation, how easy he was to manipulate, and Richard Harrison, the brilliant tech entrepreneur who built a fortune predicting human behavior, finally sees the pattern he missed in his own life. For 5 minutes, Richard does nothing. He sits with his head in his hands while the world continues outside the door, guests arriving, flowers being adjusted, his future wife preparing to walk down the aisle and destroy him. He thinks about calling it off quietly, about slipping out the back door and disappearing, about protecting himself from public humiliation. But something harder and colder settles in his chest, something that feels like justice. He has been played, manipulated, isolated, and mocked. His friends tried to warn him, and he called them jealous. His advisors raised concerns, and he dismissed them as paranoid. He did this to himself through pride and loneliness and willful blindness, but Vanessa and Marcus, they chose cruelty. They chose to laugh at his pain. And Richard, who has avoided conflict his entire life, who apologizes when others are wrong and retreats when challenged, makes a decision that surprises him. They will not get away with this. He stands, straightens his tie, picks up his phone and walks to the door. His best man is waiting in the hallway, and Richard hands him the phone with the recording cued to the beginning. In exactly 15 minutes, Richard says, his voice steady despite the earthquake in his chest. "I want you to plug this into the chapel sound system and press play. Can you do that?" The best man stares at him, confused. "Richard, what?" "Just do it," Richard says. "Exactly 15 minutes. Press play and turn the volume all the way up." The chapel is beautiful in the way expensive weddings always are, white roses and candles everywhere. 300 guests in elegant clothes, light streaming through stained glass windows, painting everything in colors that feel sacred and false at the same time. Richard walks down the aisle alone while Pachelbel's canon plays, and he sees his mother in the front row crying with happiness, and he wants to apologize for what is about to happen. He takes his position at the altar beside the officiant, a retired pastor who has known Richard's family for decades, and he waits. The music changes. The guests stand. Vanessa appears at the back of the chapel in a dress that probably cost $40,000, carrying white orchids, her face carefully arranged into an expression of joyful tears. She walks toward him slowly, savoring every moment, and Richard sees her clearly for the first time. The calculation behind the emotion, the performance instead of genuine feeling, the predator wearing the costume of a bride. She reaches the altar and takes his hands, and her skin feels cold despite the warm October air. The officiant begins, "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." Richard is not listening. He is counting seconds, watching the small door near the back where his best man disappeared with the phone. 15 minutes, 14, 13. Vanessa squeezes his hands and smiles at him, and Richard does not smile back. She notices, her eyes narrowing with a flash of concern, but then the officiant is speaking again, and she turns her attention back to the performance. The officiant reaches the part about objections. "If anyone can show just cause why this couple should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace." And Richard sees his best man emerge from the side door, carrying a microphone cable. Their eyes meet across the chapel. Richard gives a small nod. The best man connects the phone to the sound system, and suddenly Vanessa's voice fills the sacred space, loud and clear and damning. "Can't believe we're actually pulling this off. 3 more hours and everything transfers automatically." The guests gasp. Heads turn. Vanessa's face goes white, then red, then white again. She drops Richard's hands like they are burning. Marcus's voice follows. "You played him perfectly, V. I didn't think he'd sign the trust documents without reading them. But you had him so twisted up he would have signed over his kidney if you asked sweetly enough." The chapel erupts into chaos. People standing, shouting questions, the officiant stammering for order. But Richard stands perfectly still, his eyes locked on Vanessa's face as it crumbles from beautiful bride to exposed con artist. The recording continues, every word a hammer blow. The offshore accounts, the divorce clause, the corporate shells, the plan to destroy him and take everything. Vanessa's own laughter at his loneliness, her mockery of his trust, Marcus's casual cruelty as they discuss the man they are about to rob. When the recording ends, the silence in the chapel is absolute. 300 people stare at Vanessa, who stands frozen in her white dress like a statue carved from shame. Richard finally speaks, and his voice carries across the space with surprising strength. "This recording was made 1 hour ago in the hallway outside my preparation room. I did not know my phone was recording. I discovered it by accident." He turns to look at Vanessa directly. "You asked me once why I never talked about my feelings, and I told you it was because I'd spent my whole life with computers and forgot how to be vulnerable with people. You said that was sad. You said you would teach me how to trust again." His voice does not shake. "You were right that it was sad. But you did not teach me to trust. You taught me that my instincts were correct all along, that people lie, that intimacy is a weapon, and that loneliness makes us stupid." Vanessa tries to speak, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound comes. Marcus, who had been sitting in the third row, stands and begins moving toward the exit, but 2 of Richard's colleagues, both former law enforcement before joining Harrison Analytics, block the door. Richard continues. I signed documents I should not have signed. I ignored warnings from people who cared about me. I chose to believe in a performance instead of accepting reality. That part is my fault, and I will spend years fixing the damage I did to myself." He pauses. "But you chose cruelty. You chose to mock my loneliness while pretending to cure it, and I want everyone here to know exactly who you are." The aftermath is brutal and public. Vanessa tries to run, her wedding dress tangling around her legs, and she falls on the chapel steps while cameras flash. Someone has already called the local news. Marcus is detained by Richard's colleagues until police arrive. The guests disperse in scandalized clusters, and Richard knows that by evening this story will be everywhere. Social media, news sites, the subject of 1,000 think pieces about tech billionaires and gold diggers. His mother holds him while he stands numbly in the empty chapel, and she does not say, "I told you so," even though she had expressed gentle concerns he had dismissed. "You're going to be okay?" she whispers, and Richard nods, even though he does not believe her. Over the following weeks, the legal battle begins. Richard's attorneys, the ones he should have listened to months ago, work to untangle the documents Vanessa convinced him to sign. Some damage is irreversible. She already transferred $3 million from the joint account he foolishly created, and recovering it will take years of litigation. Marcus disappears, probably fleeing the country, but Vanessa is arrested on fraud charges that carry serious prison time. The media coverage is relentless and humiliating. Richard becomes a cautionary tale, a meme, a symbol of brilliant men who are fools in love. His company's stock drops 7% before stabilizing. Employees whisper in hallways and look at him with pity. But slowly, painfully, Richard rebuilds. He calls David and apologizes for 2 hours, and David accepts because that is what real friends do. Jennifer comes to his house with pizza, and they talk until dawn about trust and patterns, and how loneliness makes people vulnerable to predators who know exactly which wounds to exploit. Margaret, his secretary, never says, "I told you so," but Richard gives her a substantial raise and actually listens when she offers advice now. He starts therapy, something he always dismissed as unnecessary, and discovers that his inability to recognize red flags stemmed from deeper issues. A childhood where emotions were dismissed as illogical, a father who valued achievement over connection, a lifetime of believing that if he could just solve enough problems, he would earn love. The therapist helps him understand that Vanessa did not create his vulnerabilities. She simply weaponized ones that already existed. Richard learns, slowly and with great difficulty, that the red flags were never the problem. The problem was his desperate need to believe he deserved happiness without having to confront his own emotional emptiness first. He had treated finding a partner like debugging code, identify the goal, implement the solution, expect predictable results. But people are not algorithms, and love is not a problem that can be solved through logic alone. 6 months after the wedding that never was, Richard sits in his office at 3 in the morning, and this time, he is not working. He is writing emails to David, to Jennifer, to colleagues he had dismissed, to his mother, to anyone he had hurt while under Vanessa's influence. He apologizes, not with excuses, but with honesty. "I was wrong. I chose comfort over truth. I sacrificed real relationships for a fake one, and I am sorry." Most people respond with kindness, with forgiveness, with relief that he has returned to himself. Some do not respond at all, and Richard accepts that some bridges cannot be rebuilt. He thinks often about the accidental recording that saved him, how close he came to walking into the trap, how easily everything could have gone differently. In another version of this story, the recording never happens. The phone stays silent, and Richard signs away his fortune while 300 people watch and applaud. He would have spent years unraveling the damage, would have ended up bankrupt and broken, would have learned the truth only after the money was gone. But the recording happened. The universe granted him one moment of accidental grace, and Richard does not waste it. He becomes cautious, but not cynical, careful, but not closed. He joins a support group for fraud victims and learns he is not alone, not uniquely foolish, not weak for falling for manipulation that was expertly crafted. He donates money to organizations that help people recover from financial abuse. He speaks at conferences about the psychology of social engineering, turning his humiliation into education. The lawsuit against Vanessa concludes with her pleading guilty to fraud and receiving a 4-year prison sentence. Richard attends the sentencing, not for revenge, but for closure, and he watches her cry and apologize and claim she never meant to hurt anyone. He does not believe her, but he also does not hate her anymore. Hate requires energy and investment, and Richard has learned to save both for things that matter. As he leaves the courthouse, a reporter asks him if he regrets the relationship, and Richard considers the question carefully before answering. "I regret ignoring the truth. I regret hurting people who tried to help me. I regret not trusting myself." He pauses. "But I don't regret learning the lesson, even though it was expensive." The reporter presses. "What lesson?" Richard looks directly at the camera and speaks words he wishes he had understood years ago. "That the red flags are never the problem. The problem is believing you're too smart, too careful, too special to fall for manipulation. The problem is pride disguised as love. The problem is choosing the story you want over the reality you have." He walks away from the courthouse, from the cameras, from the chapter of his life that nearly destroyed him, and he drives home to a house that is finally quiet in a way that feels peaceful instead of lonely. In the end, it was not intelligence that saved Richard, not wealth or success or logic. It was an accident, a phone left recording in a jacket pocket, a moment of careless truth captured by technology designed for convenience. We learned that brilliance in one area does not protect us from blindness in others. That loneliness is a wound predators can smell from miles away, and that the red flags we miss are often the ones we choose not to see. Richard's story teaches us that love should not require the destruction of our judgment, that trust must be earned through consistency rather than demanded through tears, and that the people who truly care for us will tell us hard truths even when we do not want to hear them. The heart that is desperate for connection will silence the mind that sees danger, and the price of that silence can be everything we have built. But even in the rubble of broken trust and public humiliation, there is hope. The possibility of starting again, wiser and sadder, and finally willing to listen to the voice inside that whispers, "Something is wrong," when everything looks perfect. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is trust that voice, even when it costs us the love we think we need, because saving ourselves from beautiful lies is worth more than any relationship built on them. This is Tales of Truth. My beautiful people, thank you for watching this emotional story. If it touched your heart, please like this video so more people can learn from it. And if you're new here, hit subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Don't miss any of our powerful stories. Before you leave, tell me in the comments, what part of today's story touched you the most? Your comments help the channel grow and bring more stories your way. See you in the next emotional journey.